all the contributions that I had noted, all the most notable contributions into computer graphics and area, which is subdivision surfaces, texture mapping, and Z buffering or depth buffering, which all, to you, it was connected together to be able to do things fast and more accurately. So in those days, what was seen as the goal or objective of computer graphics? I'm sure people were not thinking about games and other entertainment of that kind. It was for engineering or designing aircrafts or the big things, the important things. What was the take on computer graphics when the large team in Utah worked in late 60s and early 70s and all?
Well, I think one of the brilliant things that came out of ARPA, and ARPA in the United States sort of, fell through the cracks. So when Sputnik was launched by the Soviets, then of course there was all sorts of response and reactions, and the military was jumping in on various things to respond to an immediate threat. And so this smaller group wanted to take a long-term approach, which was to further develop computers. And incidentally, for one of those early years, Ivan Sutherland was actually the head of ARPA. But what was brilliant about what ARPA did was they funded smart students around the United States, and they had very little bureaucracy or oversight. They just believed that people were going to try to find and solve the problems. And they picked several different areas that they thought were important. Obviously, computer languages and architectures were important, but they believed that at some point, the processing power would be great enough that they'd produce a lot of data, and that we would probably need something graphical to see it. So this is rather an abstract notion to begin with. It's a faith that something big is coming. Let's get started. And I think that was brilliant on their part. And Utah was picked as the place to focus on. At the same time, ARPA wanted the researchers to talk with each other. So the beginning of the ARPANET was not because they thought they were going to turn something into what became the internet. They just wanted people to talk to each other because everybody was using a different kind of computer, all of which were incompatible. So I arrived just after the very first generation had started on graphics and on the internet. And the first 4 nodes of ARPANET was Berkeley, UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, and Utah. So we were the first 4, but it was ARPANET. And it's one of those things where you do something as needed and you don't know where it's going to take off. And they weren't even conceiving of it at that time as to what it was going to turn into or how profound it was going to be.
I want to ask you some points of view on the 2 things that you already mentioned. One is ARPA being giving you all the freedom to do what the students wanted, just find smart people and fund them, and good things will come out of it. Is that still active now, or are the funding agencies in US and the world over not believing in that anymore?
Well, there was a period of time in which ARPA funded that across the United States, and it was extremely productive. And then it weakened. This is just around the time that I graduated. They began to, the program weakened, but it continued. And then later they started doing it again at a high level. And of course, the one that's, I think, fairly famous from several years ago was the autonomous driving vehicles. And there was ARPA that was driving that. So ARPA actually regained strength, and they renamed themselves as DARPA. They put defense in front of the word. I like ARPA. I think ARPA sounds better as a term. But they became strong, but they've always been there, and they funded research out in various places. And even at Pixar, we had a contract once with them to do some work for them. And as I say, the one they always had was very low bureaucracy. Now, I'd reached a point where I was on committees evaluating whether or not, NIH or the National Science Foundation should fund somebody. But ARPA always had the lowest bureaucracy. And I always thought that was the best. And the reason is that if someone's coming to graduate school, they want to make a difference. So if you're putting a whole bunch of restrictions on them, then you're slowing them down at this stage in their career. And people hate to waste money, so they want to look over people's shoulders. Well, from my point of view, that's stupid. You're slowing people down. You're far better off having low bureaucracy, let people move as fast as they can. And then you will find some people who don't do good work, or they might abuse it. That can happen, right? But the cost of that is far lower than the cost of putting in a lot of bureaucracy and trying to prevent problems from happening. I still believe that to this day.
I hope academic administrators and funding managers in India and all over the world are listening to you. Watching this. In your work at New York Tech and later at ILM or Pixar, in the area of animation, you created Rise, RenderMan, all the other packages. Animation as an academic research area that universities pursue? What has been the content of, was it felt then? What was the contribution that from the academic point of view, your work at New York Tech or later in the companies created?
Well, when I graduated with my doctor's degree, I went to interview at jobs at different universities. And when I interviewed with them, I said that the state of the art is such that we can make images look better and better and ultimately can make an animated film with them. Now, all those schools that I interviewed with thought that was about the dumbest thing they could imagine wasting money on. I couldn't get a job. So I ended up working for a small startup company that was doing computer-aided design. And I was just there for a little while when I got a call from the New York Institute of Technology, which at that time was a third-rate school, but they were willing to fund it. So I was hired to come in and start an R&D group for doing animation because the president of the school wanted to do animation. He knew nothing about technology at all. He just thought computers are going to change things, so I'm going to fund it. So he hired me to come start this group down in New York. And while we were located on a campus, none of our employees came from the students. We weren't actually part of the school program. We were just paid for by the school. And everybody that we got were essentially these PhDs from all around the world trying to solve these problems. And one of the things that we did early on, I should say, when I left Utah, I loved that environment so much. It was so exciting that I wanted to replicate it. Now, I really couldn't replicate it because that wasn't the kind of school this was at. I was really just running a research group. I shouldn't say just, it was a research group, but that's not the same thing as an academic environment. But as a manager, as a brand new manager, never having managed before, I made some mistakes because I didn't know what I was doing as a manager. And I didn't even see myself as a manager. I was a researcher. So I was in charge, but I didn't want to do the work of managing. I wanted to do the research. And I had a lot of great ideas. So it took me a while to sort of figure out that managing was also really interesting. Now, I made a bunch of mistakes there, but I also did some things that were right. One of them was that we published everything that we did. No, I'm not saying that every company or every school should do this, but I'm saying that for us, the decision was we're going to publish everything, And then we went to Lucasfilm. I kept the same policy. We published everything. And then at Pixar, we published everything. And then at Disney, we published everything. And even Steve Jobs, who's known for being secretive, he never challenged me or questioned why we're publishing everything, because there was a reason for it. My belief was that we were so far away from our goal that it was critical that we be completely engaged with our community.
So the use of technology in movies, there are two sides to it. One is the special effects or VFX that ILM or companies like that still do, and then there is full animation, which Pixar and DreamWorks, all of them did. So is that, in that era, that is maybe early 80s, did anyone dare to actually make a full movie on the computer using computer graphics, or is just still doing bits and special effects?
Well, first of all, the special effects in the industry was done with real models and very sophisticated optical systems. We were the research division as part of Lucasfilm. We were actually never part of ILM. And our group, which is the computer division, was responsible for coming up with computer graphics for special effects, for digital video, and for editing of digital audio. Now, at this time, the industry was not digital for audio. There was no digital video editing, and the effects were done by models and by film. And you had the beginnings of people starting to have fairly simple graphics for commercials. And there was one group, a secretive group, that was more advanced. They had a Cray computer, and they made a couple of pieces that were put into a film later. The first film that actually included some computer graphics was Future World, which incidentally was not a very good film. But what they included was that handpiece that I did for that class project was in Future World. And then a student of mine, and not student, a colleague of mine, another student, Fred Park, digitized his wife's face talking. So that was in the movie. So that's the first real computer graphics. And I'm the first person to work on research on motion blur with computer graphics. And this is back at New York Tech. I made several images trying to solve the problem. Motion blur is important because of a physiological problem with the way film is projected. Computer graphics images are in perfect focus. And when film is projected, most people don't know this. Of course, now we usually have digital projection. But at this time, all projection was film projection. And every frame was flashed on the screen twice. So if you're tracking something that's moving across the screen, then your eye is moving, but the image appears, a sharp edge appears the same place on the movie screen. So when your eye moves, that sharp edge appears in a separate place in the back of your eyeball. So you see a double image wherever there's a sharp edge moving across the screen. And the reason you don't see it with live action film is that when they photograph actors with cameras, they are blurred in the direction of motion. So there are no sharp edges for the eye to key on. So the perfection of computer graphics was actually a perceptual problem. So we had to solve this. So we had two different approaches. I was trying to come up with an analytic approach, and Rob and Lauren were trying a different approach. And then one of our engineers suggested something with some random sampling. So for most of this time, I was competing with Rob and Lauren because they took one approach and I took the other. It was not a fair competition because there were two of them, one of me. And I was also the boss, so I didn't have as much time. But it was awesome because we got together every week. We were trying to outdo each other. And you just sort of felt, we're like, we're progressing, we're making all these things happen. And then when this concept of the stochastic sampling came in, then suddenly that just blew past the approach that I had.
So tell us a little bit about Lexo Junior, how it was made and its impact.
Well, the first program, the first animation that was made using this software with the motion blur was Andre and Wally B. And then the second one was while we were in the process of spinning off as Pixar. So it was made just after we spun off as Pixar. And that was what was Lexo Junior. And for each of these films, we would try to pick something which was challenging to help us drive the technology forward. So the plan was make some short films. Then we wanted to make some commercials because we wanted to subject ourselves to the rigors of business pressure. Because we knew that that would be a different kind of thing. It's different than academic pressure, right? Where you're trying to get something ready to show at SIGGRAPH. But initially it was do some shorts, then do some commercials, then do a half-hour television special, then do a feature film. Now, in fact, what happened is by the time we got to the state where we could do a commercial, then Disney, who we'd had a software partnership with, they said, well, if you can do a half hour, you can do a feature film. So we just skipped the half hour one and went off to do Toy Story. So Toy Story was, we signed the contract to make it in 1991. It was a pretty important year. We signed the contract to make it. Beauty and the Beast came out, and we had written the graphics software for Beauty and the Beast, but they also used the 3D graphics for this ballroom dance that took place in Beauty and the Beast. And it was also the year that Terminator 2 came out. So when we split off as Pixar from Lucasfilm, then the technology that we used was also part of the deal that Lucasfilm could now use it. And then I helped them find 2 people to head up their brand new computer graphics group inside of ILM. So we had done some special effects for ILM, like in Star Trek, but we were a separate division. We just did it working in conjunction with them. So as we left, we started a new group. They could use the software. And then they got the contract to do something for the Abyss. And then more importantly, in 1991 is when Terminator 2 came out that had that silver robot. And so 91 was a very impactful year. For us, it was the start of making Toy Story, and it took us 4 years. So in 95, it came out. And when it came out, it then sort of shocked everybody. So DreamWorks, which is doing 2D animation at the time, bought a company for doing, they bought PDI to make Shrek, Blue Sky, which was owned by Fox, which now it's owned by Disney, but Blue Sky, and we were all friends with each other. but our success opened the door for the others because it proved that it was commercially viable. And so Toy Story essentially was like this step function in the industry.
I listened to Steve Jobs, who gave a talk at SIGGRAPH 95, and I was there, and he was talking about the fully computer-generated Toy Story coming out in 1995, exactly 100 years after the first feature film or movie film by Lumiere brothers, and he was talking of this as a historical necessity, and as Steve is good at, he's really talking it up. So how was working with Steve Jobs, because he's a cult figure, everybody likes him, and he has had lasting impact on many things. What are your personal feelings or professional approach that he took to the kind of thing that you were involved with?
Well, when Steve was younger, he was pretty difficult to deal with. And when he acquired Pixar, that was who he was. That's like, I knew that's when Steve was like that. So, and he was in an odd state because he'd been kicked out of Apple. He was now starting this company, which was Next Computer, and then struggling with that. The only other company he invested in was Pixar. He actually tried to buy Pixar before starting Next because he wanted to turn us into what Next became. And so we turned him down. He then formed Next, and then we ran into him later at SIGGRAPH in San Francisco and restarted the conversations. And this time, Steve bought Pixar under the terms that we were a computer graphics company. But what I found over the years was that Steve's story is really more like the classical hero's journey. So he was cast out of his kingdom for various problems, and he wandered around in the wilderness, struggling, making mistakes, and learning, making mistakes with Pixar, making mistakes with Next. But he was learning. Every time he made this mistake, he would consolidate it. And I watched Steve change a lot. And then he got married, had some kids, and Laureen had a remarkable influence. He got more humor in his life. He let Pixar have a very different culture. The culture at Pixar was not at all like Apple, or like Next, I mean. And he wasn't trying to make us be like that. He said, it's good to be unique and to be different. So in the few years before Toy Story, Steve went through a fairly remarkable transition. And there are things he did which were just jaw-droppingly amazing. He's so incredibly smart. And after he went through that change, when he sort of figured these things out, the people that were with him stayed with him for the rest of his life.
The industry is going through a lot of changes and consolidation. DreamWorks filing for bankruptcy or getting acquired, Rhythm and Hughes. There's so much happening. What has this industry hit a plateau? Now you can do these things easier. You don't need a lot of creativity or innovation. What is the reason? Why is there so much turmoil, at least as I see it, in the industry?
Well, if you look at from a technical point of view, the very best work, which is done at Disney and Pixar, they have two separate groups. We keep them pretty separate from each other. They communicate a lot, but they actually use different systems and different processes, which is something I believe in. The differences actually work to our advantage. If you look at special effects, let me stay away from animation companies for a minute. If you look at special effects, the ability to buy the software and the hardware is pretty easy. So there's a low barrier to entry to get the equipment. So what you need then are people who are trained to be able to make the artistic decisions. because there are a lot of companies who can do it, and a lot of people coming out of schools who are trained to do it, the result is that the special effects companies are in a very low margin business. So it's a difficult business. So like the Rhythm and Hughes, who was a really good company. John Hughes is running it, and he had a group there in India, and had a great spirit about it. To me, I think they're a pretty fantastic company, but the margins were too low. It was so competitive that it was hard for them to sustain anything there.
So it's sad because many of my students worked in DreamWorks in Bangalore, and Rhythm and Hughes was, I sit in Hyderabad, my university is in Hyderabad, and Rhythm and Hughes is hardly a couple of miles away. And I have taken my graphics students to the Rhythm and Hughes studio to see how they do things about 10 years ago when they were still very active.
Yeah, so, that was a great group. I visited them incidentally.
So there are new art forms.
The group for DreamWorks there in Hyderabad also, that was a very good group.
Yes.
And they basically finished a movie after being notified that Universal was going to cut them off, when actually their best people were there in Hyderabad. But Universal didn't want to have this image of laying off American workers while still employing people in India.
So do you think there is scope for hybrid of VFX, special effects, and animation, now that there are many stop motion art forms like stop motion and big, very, very capable cameras, versatile cameras available? Is there a scope for combining the two and creating things that never been seen before?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. First of all, a lot of hybrid work is already being done in the live action films. But when I saw the Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, that had a very different artistic look to it, which I thought was very successful. And they did a really good job with the story too. I thought they really pulled it off. So, and the trick with the technology is to understand that while we want things to look good, it's not about that. That the most important thing is that the story be good. And I mean, even if you think about Finding Nemo, what most people forget is that they go into the dentist's office and they see the humans look terrible. Nobody remembers that. It doesn't matter. I mean, now there's no way in the world that Pixar or Disney would ever think that they could let something out that looked as bad as those humans do. But you know something? It honestly did not matter in that movie.
What do you think of technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality? What is its potential for entertainment industry to be an alternate media that gives different experiences, etc.? They have been, the ideas have been around for many years. They have not really reached a critical stage of adoption, if you ask me. What's your take on that?
Well, actually, there are a couple of things. One of them is very important. But the first I want to note is that AR and VR were implemented by Ivan Sutherland about 52 years ago. All right, so they've been around a long time, and people have been working on them. Some putting a lot of energy, like University of North Carolina has been working on it a long time, and and people have worked on storytelling or various things that they need to do to try to solve the problem. So they were, Henry Fuchs and others there were pushing the boundaries there, trying to make it happen. Then all of a sudden, a while ago, the buzz really hit, and that was when Oculus came out. Now, what most people didn't realize, that almost nobody realized, is that all that Oculus did was that it was fast enough that it got rid of the lag time. There was no other difference. So in terms of storytelling or anything else like that, all they had was that perceptual difference of lag time. It's important, it's our physiological perception of things. But all of a sudden people were saying, well, we're going to do all this, we're going to tell stories. Facebook and Google all got really caught up in funding money and all this because they started to follow down this hype trail without actually even including or talking with people who thought about storytelling. Now, to come back to the question about AR and VR, virtual reality is kind of a big field. You can think of it can be used for different kinds of things. If it comes to like storytelling, if the world is the character, it makes a lot of sense. Like if you want to go into the world of Star Wars or into the world of Harry Potter and his castle, if the world is the character and you want to explore it, it works well. But when it comes to telling a story, it's really not very good. I've only seen 2 or 3 good storytelling pieces. And the reason is that storytelling is a carefully crafted medium where you are directing where people are looking. So if you take a film which was, you know, among the better of the films, I don't think it was wholly successful, but it was Pearl. I think it was the one where they're in a Volkswagen. And so you're in this virtual reality and you're sitting next to the driver and you're watching this story. But because you're in virtual reality, you're not sure where to look. And you can look out the window, you can see stuff out there. But the fact that you can look around and you don't know where to look actually gives a barrier between you and the story. It distances you. It doesn't actually pull you into it. It separates you from you. Now, they made a cut of the story to submit to the Academy Awards, which is now just a regular 2D one. So it's not virtual reality. It's just the director going through and making a cut of the story. The director's 2D cut of the VR was a better story than when you actually sat in there in that seat and watched it. And there's a reason for it. Now, that I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying, okay, they haven't figured it out yet, which is why you experiment and you try things. But you just don't naively say, oh, now we're in the world, we've got all these added advantages. Well, they're, you know, that isn't necessarily true, but there are a lot of places where it's very powerful to be in that world there, where you really want to be in there. And it is very important. So it's this broad range, and one has to think of this broad range of virtual reality, and storytelling is just one little really hard corner of it. Worth looking at from a point of view of research and for either companies or students or something like that. But it's still early stages. And augmented reality, obviously coming too. Some of it I think the analogy for me is like when we were starting off, knowing we didn't have enough compute power. So honestly, I didn't worry a lot about the compute power. I worried about the algorithms and the other important things, knowing that it was going to come. And I feel like, oh, that's kind of where we are. Get augmented reality, virtual reality. There's really important things coming. There's still some physical things in terms of the way it fits on your head and the comfort and the perception and how it matches up with things like that. They'll solve those ultimately. So it's coming, but let's not pretend we're someplace where we aren't, because I've seen people do that in the past. They fool themselves, they waste a lot of money, then they fail. When in fact, the big vision may have been correct in the first place.
Thanks for sparing so much time. One last question I have is, you have now won the Turing Award along with Pat, and it's a great moment, recognition from the professional computing community, and we are all proud for this moment. But you've also been there at Academy Awards, several Academy Awards, Golden Globe Awards, and Grammy Awards, etc. How do you compare, the feeling that you get when you're in those venues or when you win those awards compared to the professional or technical community, computing community award like Turing Award?
Well, if I think about how I felt about different kinds of professional interactions, the Turing Award was actually the biggest surprise, that I never thought that was possible.
Computer graphics has evolved from simple line drawings to photorealistic 3D animation. Join us as we hear from computer graphics pioneers Ed Catmull and Pat Hanrahan, the 2019 ACM AM Turing Award recipients. Ed Catmull founded the Computer Graphics Lab at New York Institute of Technology, the computer division of Lucasfilm, and Pixar Animation Studios. Pat Hanrahan is also a founding member of Pixar and developed rendering software for creating realistic computer graphics scenes.
Academy Awards, or the Oscars in general, they're voted on by members, but usually it's highly related to the quality of the film itself. On some of the awards, though, the Oscars are picked by colleagues. And when it's picked by colleagues, in both cases, whether it's in the entertainment industry or in the academic, is when it means the most, because it's the people who are expert in the area who are saying things. So they do mean a lot. But I'd have to say, just to be honest, that for all the feelings I've had, including premieres of films and looking at reviews and so forth, the thing that's always made me feel the best was when we sat down with the leaders at Pixar, and we've got some problem, and the leaders in the room, and as we're working out the problem, and we don't have solutions, the people in that room own the problem. They're not looking at me and saying, "What are you going to do about it?" You're the leader. What are you going to do? It's like, what are we going to do? And when I walk out of those meetings and people are owning it and they're saying that it's their problem also, I just felt it may sound odd, but it actually made me feel better than anything else I've ever gotten in terms of awards or experiences in participating in award shows.
Thank you very much, Ed, for sparing so much time and having a delightful and insightful conversation on various topics. On behalf of the Indian computing community, ACM India, and me in personal, I thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure to talk with you. I know you've got some very smart students there, and people there in the community in India. And I wish you all the very best, and I'm looking forward to talking with you again when the presentation.
So thank you once again. Stay safe, stay strong, and in these times. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I see Dr. Ed Catmull. So welcome, Ed. I hope you liked what we cut of the long interview we had, but I'm planning to place the whole long 90-minute segment also on YouTube or somewhere for people to access. So there are a bunch of questions already, and I request all the attendees to type more questions. One question from Dr. PK, is known by PK, is a professor at one institution. He is intrigued by you mentioning a few times that I made a few mistakes. If you are okay with it, please share one or two of them. Maybe it will help us not to repeat it if you are in similar situation, given that we have many PhD students in the audience and may listen to this video later also. What are the 3 qualities that you think PhD students should build during the PhD life to have lasting impact for the research? So there are 2 different questions. One is about sharing some mistake. One is about advice to PhD students.
Well, at New York Tech, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a researcher. So I had some theories, and the theories were about how to manage. And my theory was that you only hire people who are highly self-motivated and don't need managing. And after I was there for a while, I had a very flat structure actually, about 40 people under me, and I realized I'd made a mistake. Now some of my theories were correct, but that one, for instance, was just wrong. First of all, you can't always tell how highly motivated somebody is in an interview. But the more important thing is there are a lot of people who do great work. They just need to have some management. And as I left New York Tech, I realized about a third of my theories about how to run a research group were wrong. So when I started at Lucasfilm, it was like a do-over. And I adopted the view, which I still have today, that about a third of my theories about how to do things are just wrong. And I actually think this is important. Everybody would say, well, we all make mistakes, and we're going to have some errors, and nobody's going to claim to be perfect. But this isn't about being close. It's actually saying, actually, I'm more wrong than I think I am. And I think it's important for people to get there. It's like, I'm more wrong than I think I am. Because what it does is it opens you up to what others have and to what others see. So that was one of the lessons coming out of it. You know, some of the mistakes were like the individual decision that was made. It felt like a general one or was particularly useful here. But when you're doing something new, which fundamentally you're trying to do, and students coming out, you want to go out and do something new in the world, then one needs to have a mental image that, oh, we're just trying something new. I'm trying to get the picture right. I want my ethics right. I want to have make contributions. But if I come up with a sort of a goal or a contribution, it's by definition, it's loosey. And you don't really quite know exactly where it's going to go, which means that as you approach it, you're really approaching it almost tactically, which means you're going to make mistakes. By definition, you don't know what you're doing. And that's a good place to be, where you can do that and that it's safe to do it. And the other thing I learned early on, especially when I was starting off, is I didn't have a lot of credibility because I was new. And but what I found was that some people, after they went through their early phases, they forgot the problems that they faced when they were starting. And so one of them is, if you see something in your life or in your management and your work that you don't like, you sometimes don't have control over it. You have control over your own actions, but you don't always control your environment. But you should always learn from it. And even if you can't fix it, you'll learn it, because at some point later you'll be in a place where you can make different decisions.
Okay, I have another question from Parikshit, a PhD student, a little technical nature. Your insight into the simulation of motion blur instead of sharp edges was interesting. As animation matured, more and more physics must have naturally made its way into the simulation programs. Do you think there needs to be more academic programs where optics, physics, and animation are studied together?
Well, interestingly enough, at Utah, there were two fields that were tightly integrated, which was image processing and computer graphics, which then separated because they were like different specialty in different departments. And then in various areas, they started to come back together again. But it was, I thought, extremely useful to have had that discipline of the image processing, which was different than that of generating the imagery. And you are correct that as we advanced in the field of computer graphics, then simulation became increasingly important. And so basically we hired PhDs in simulation and in physics, extraordinary people who developed some of the fundamental algorithms, as well as recognizing that we weren't just doing simulation because we had to control the simulation. So for instance, if you got the wind is blowing leaves around, well, you may want a leaf to land in a certain place. So what you need is something which is simulation, yet with a different kind of control or constraints, which aren't part of the programs that are written for simulators in other fields. So it's learning from one field, adding to it, publishing it. It goes back, and then frankly, people in other fields, they get interested because you've got similar kinds of problems. And then you start to have joint papers. And every time you have this connection where two fields come together in a joint problem, you very frequently end up with some really interesting new approaches, new ways of thinking about things, and you open up new fields. And simulations come just a phenomenally long way. It's pretty stunning, really.
Yeah, there are a bunch of comments or questions on educating or teaching computer graphics. Computer graphics is touches everybody, yet it is still not a compulsory subject in the computer science curricula today. Is computer graphics a solved problem? Should people be working on it? Are there scope for, as from an undergraduate student to get employment that's related to computer graphics that keeps them engaged in a fruitful way? Is computer graphics a solved problem? Because much has been done, a lot has been developed. Is there a lot of scope as an undergraduate student as well as a PhD student?
Well, the leading schools that I'm, of course, aware of, I know the faculty there have known for a long time, and the new faculty that's coming along, they keep coming up with new creative ideas. And there's a reason for it, though. And that is, underneath this industry, so underneath a lot of industries, have been a few events that are, or not events, a few processes that have been basically exponential. So the most, the best known one is Moore's law. So here you got 55 years of an exponential increase, which is doubling every 18 to 24 months, and it's slowing down somewhat. But that's like this under this driving factor underneath. But then you've got the graphics cards, which came out of the games industry, which have increased at a greater rate and have enabled neural networking to become reality. So neural networking or neural networks, like virtual reality now being regular reality, it's an idea that came up 50 years ago, and smart people were working on it, but there wasn't enough horsepower or processing power in order to really advance the field. Well, as a result of the increased processing speed that came out of chips being designed for the games industry using algorithms that came out of the graphics industry, we end up with enough processing to restart deep learning, and then which is self-created industry. So you've got these processes. So not only do you have Moore's law, but you've also got the same exponential forces in driving down the cost of sensors. And then you've got a massive amount of data now because of the internet, more data than we ever had before. Like, what do you do with that? Now, the interesting thing is the reason that Utah was given the task of working in computer graphics. I mean, if it wasn't Utah, it was going to be somebody else. But they believed that computers are going to get to be a lot faster, and at some point we'd have so much data we needed other ways of seeing it. Well, we haven't stopped coming up with new ways of getting data. We haven't stopped this exponential process, and faster and faster, cheaper and cheaper sensors. So the need to visualize in different ways is continually changing. And that's the thing we should never forget in anything we're doing. we see these amazing changes. Well, they were a result of the confluence of a number of factors. And among these factors are frequently exponential processes that take place over some period of time. Exponential processes are not intuitive. I posit that it is actually quite, well, I'm not saying this right. Our ability to predict what is going to falls off rapidly when something changes by an order of magnitude. But we're in a field where a lot of things are changing by an order of magnitude every 4 or 5 years. So we can't draw big conclusions other than to say that in terms of graphics, like, yeah, there's still going to be need. we still have problems.
So taking off on that, there are also questions on current machine learning based methods which directly simulate or create some of these, faces, characters, deep fake, etc. They don't do any modeling in the conventional kind. They train a network to create very realistic looking characters or faces and scenes. Is that a threat or is it an opportunity? What's your view on that?
Well, it's like most technologies. Typically, if somebody advances something, one is looking for the positive side of it, and we frequently ignore the negative side. So, I mean, as an example, I remember years and years ago, as the internet was just starting to begin, people were making these predictions about how it's going to increase communication. Information will be more available around the world. You get better contact with people. And the thing is, that actually took place. But what they didn't predict, that we were also going to have toxic silos where some bad things happen and bad actors are there. And when I look at something like deep fakes, then obviously the reason you asked a question about threat is that we now know that they're just plain or bad actors who try to take advantage of something wherever it is. It's like a reality. How do we think about it? What do we do about it? I don't think there's anything about saying this that's going to stop the this skill of making images look more and more realistic. But at the same time, in terms of simulation, something to say visually, you are right. The models themselves are built into the deep learning itself. That's not the same as the model of the real world. There are differences, and it's not uncommon for somebody to come up with something and extrapolate to something that it isn't. It is a phenomenally powerful thing, but it doesn't actually necessarily represent a model that will do some of the things we'd like to do. And I haven't even read a lot of people coming up with good models for good internal representations.
So one person, Vijay, says he enjoyed reading your book, Creativity Inc. I guess academic groups can also benefit by incorporating practices from industry. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember, this is back when I was in graduate school, one of the professors left. He said he wanted to leave the cutthroat world of academia and go into the ivory tower world of industrial research. Because he was frustrated with the bureaucracy which can happen in some schools. And I know the schools vary in how they do that, how they think about it. It has to do with the personalities of people. But I loved the environment that we had because we were asked to participate in a bigger vision and contribute to it. And we came up with our own contributions, and the students worked well with each other. And it actually made this rather amazing environment. And anytime I see people just really trying to solve a problem and making a contribution to the world, or moving their field forward with excitement, and sleeping on the computer room floor at night. Of course, they don't do that anymore. But I think that's good, and environments should be that. These are social environments also. You're working with people who are friends, allies, long-term colleagues, and that's a good place to be.
There's also a question on your role as CEO of Walt Disney Animation Studios or even Pixar. How did the transition from a first-hand animation person to someone who manages team of animators or creating movies? How does this transition take place? How did you feel about it?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
You moved from being a animation person to a CEO of Pixar or Disney later. How did this transition? How did it affect you? This transition?
Well, it happened fairly slowly, so I could observe the changes. And as I mentioned, from the interview that you had played, that originally my mental image of myself was as a researcher, and I didn't actually want to be the leader. But at the same time, I liked being in charge. It's like this, I'm also like guilty because, well, it's nice to be in charge, but I didn't want the responsibility that came with it. But as I said, it was really interesting how you get people to work together in a way that everybody felt like it's their problem. That is, you're all working together. Well, that's an interesting problem. But I also noticed over time that as new people came in, and I had now published some papers and I had to get into reputation, that they treated me a little bit differently than the people I've been working with. And I thought, well, I think from an interaction point of view, I haven't changed that much, but the way they're treating me is different. So basically, I just realized this is that sometimes people respond to you as the position rather than as the person that you are. And they do that. It's like, not everybody does, but it's going to happen. But I could just observe that. And when I talk with other presidents of companies, some people are very aware of that process. That is, people are setting things up for them, or they're trying to say what the person wants to hear. And some people are not aware of the process. They're not aware that they're being managed from below, which I think is damaging to a company. But because I could go through it slowly, and I had enough failures along the way, I could realize that I was frequently deluded. I know some people who are very successful and they're deluded because they were too successful too fast. I think it's one of the things that made Steve great in the end was that Steve had a massive, or actually three significant failures. And because he learned from it, he became this completely different person. And on the other hand, I've seen people shoot up like a rocket and they draw a lot of wrong conclusions from the process. Well, observing that's interesting too. So it isn't as if, for me, the technology was always really interesting and fascinating. And the fact that we were using it for storytelling was interesting. And the fact that we were, as a group of people and friends, making our own story as a company, that was interesting. There are a lot of interesting things in the world.
So there are a bunch of comments and questions on virtual reality. While realizing, the storytelling is the key aspect. Aren't there special areas where virtual reality could be a great tool? Or more importantly, how do we use these new technologies, new medias like virtual reality? Now, who should develop a new storytelling paradigm that involve these technologies? Is the job of the new kind of directors, or who should be doing this, and how should they be thinking about it?
Well, I think the first thing you do is to step back and say that in the era of virtual reality, or in the area, it actually is a fairly broad spectrum. It's like a space of possible solutions. In fact, your first question was, well, what's the future of computer graphics? Well, this is part of it. And right now, as you do virtual reality, there are some things where it works. You put on the goggles and you move around. But being in the most successful of them, you say, well, okay, when the sensors and the devices detect where your head are, get to the point where you don't recognize them or feel them, and you've got various other things to tie into the senses and so that you can become immersed, then it will change the nature of what you can do. It will change that space of solutions you can go after. And it's one of those things where that's definitely going to happen. Right? There's no question about it. I don't know exactly when or at what rate, because it's still on an exponential growth path. So one can with confidence say it's going to become more and more important. Now, what are the areas? Well, there are some places where they've been using it for a long time, which has to do with design work, because sometimes if you're designing something, you move your head around and you see it. In fact, when I was a graduate student at the University of Utah, we had a head-mounted display. There was an arm going up to the ceiling to decide where the head was. And I was out there pulling points to make a model in space. So there's an area of design work. And then there is, let's take another space like news. I've seen some cases where they went out and they gathered news using virtual reality equipment, and it's very impactful. In fact, the one area, a fairly broad area, is where the environment itself is the character. Then it's a pretty natural fit. So if you want to go into Harry Potter's school or into the world of Star Wars and explore the world, then you can do that. And you can do it today. And that's where the environment's the character. So of all these spaces, many of which are very important and have got a big future in front of them, one of the hardest problems is that of storytelling. Because storytelling is just that, it's like you are telling something. So storytelling is different than experiencing, and which is okay. So if you think about games, most people who play with games, there's a whole world, there's a language of using games, of basically physically, you got a device that's like the language of your interfacing with this game. Most people still look at the games, even without, even if they have virtual reality, most people prefer not to use it. And one of the reasons is that the notion of 3D space is actually in your head. The amount of information that can come in your eyes at any one time is actually pretty low bandwidth. But it feels like it's a massive amount coming in. But what it's really doing is it's relying upon the fact that we model the world in our heads, which is different than what deep learning is doing. So it's a different underlying representation. So you've got a small amount of information coming into an existing world you've got in your head. So frequently, you don't need to have another immersive device because you're largely immersed in it with a 2D representation. Now, will that change materially if the device becomes so light and with a little lag that it actually alters how we think about it? Probably, right? That's absolutely worth doing. So if one thinks about storytelling, then one to think of it in terms of, well, we haven't actually developed the language for storytelling in a virtual reality. So, but we should be experimenting with it. The fact that it's not a commercial market yet is not important. We're talking about research and development. Now, we tried something at both at Disney and at Pixar. And we had a problem is one of the lead artists basically shot down every idea for virtual reality because he couldn't answer the question of why it should be in virtual reality. So I was not. We had 90 proposals and we didn't do any of them, so I was not happy about that. But down at Disney, we actually didn't have any of the lead artists decide what the project is. We had the people who had the passion, and they're the ones that made a project, which is the most successful virtual reality project that I'd ever seen. And they were using the lighting and sound to guide the eye. All right, so that's a start, right? How do you let people know where to look? Well, if you think about it, when you walk into a room and it's full of people, you got all sorts of noise and stuff there, then with your brain and your perception, you decide where to look and why you're looking there. Okay, we can do that. With the current state of virtual reality storytelling, we don't really know. We don't have enough clues yet, and we haven't trained ourselves to do it. In addition, if another example, in the early days of live action filmmaking, the pacing of films was very different than it is today. Now, one of the reasons is that as we grew up with it, our understanding of the language of film changed our sense of pacing. So if we see an actor go to a hotel door and open it, and then in the next shot, they're at the balcony in the hotel looking out. All right, so we kept 20 seconds out of it. And if we showed the 20 seconds, it'd be deadly boring. So everybody now knows this, and we all get the clue. So we all of a sudden find somebody is 40 feet away from where they were before. That's perfectly natural. We don't think anything of it. This is the stage we're at of figuring this out. And that's the job with researchers who want to do storytelling with computer graphics.
Yeah, so new ideas in cinematography or presentation or use of this technology have to evolve, and that will happen when technology is also more ubiquitous. It's in everybody's hands. So Ed, thanks for spending this time. I will end with a comment sent by one of our ACM India members. His 11-year-old daughter, Ahana, was watching the interview with him. And she is fascinated by your contribution, Ed's contribution to creating all the fascinating movies she has grown up with. She wants to thank you and the colleagues who made it. And I'm sure this sentiment is very universal. I would like to echo that myself with all the movies, starting with so one of the comments that one of my students told about your work is there is no pixel in an animated movie that is not touched by Ed's work. So you have been very foundational work you have done in making sure such fantastic movies are made, and also as part of Pixar and Disney, been involved, I'm sure, in many decisions that created specific movies which all thrilled us down to the soul. So thank you very much for taking the time. I thank you from ACM India behalf of ACM India, as well as all the audience and the Indian computing community. You said in our conversation that you have visited India several times. Hopefully, in a year's time, when things clear up, we will have you visit us and have more face-to-face, more real interaction than over a screen. And I love the fact that you're wearing a Utah shirt. Maybe, good for Go Utah.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I would now, the next session, to conduct the next session, I would like to hand the control to Hemant Pandey, who is the Executive Director of ACM India, but he's a technologist. He was a IIT Bombay BTech. He has a PhD in computer science from Rutgers, but he's been with industry. And the last year and plus 2 years, he's been an Executive Director of ACM to drive things forward. Over to you, Hemant.
Thank you, PJN, as we fondly call him. And it's indeed an honor to have Dr. Catmull with us, and thanks to Professor Narayanan, PJN, and Dr. Catmull for a great live session. Okay, and now I request Milin to come on video and audio. Let's test that out.
Yeah. So hi, Hemant. Can you hear me?
Certainly, we can hear you.
So let me share my screen.
Before that, I don't think I can see you on video though.
Okay. Yeah, wait a sec. So let me start the video as well.
Yeah, that's great.
That's
yes, can see you. Okay,
Yeah.
hope everybody can see him. Okay, I can certainly see you. Great. Okay, hi Milin.
So should I share my screen now?
We can test that out. And of course,
okay. So here's the screen.
But once we do that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, then I'll lose you. Yeah, is that you lose my video?
No. Share the screen, and then I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you start your screen share? It's coming up. Wonderful. Okay.
Is it? Yeah. Is it coming up?
Yeah, we can see you. So it's my privilege to introduce Professor Milin Sohni of IIT Bombay as well as IIT Goa. Okay. Milin, he's received his BTech from Computer Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay, as I said, so we share the same alma mater. So he did his master's from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and PhD from IIT Bombay again. So as I said, he's currently professor at IIT Bombay as well as IIT Goa. And he's also been the head of Sitara, which is the academic center of IIT Bombay devoted to development. So Milin is known for his work in both theoretical computer science as well as in development, in theory, as well as practice. So in the area of development, he works on drinking water, on higher education, especially in aligning engineering and development. So today's talk will certainly bring that out with his example of public transport. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Milin. Milin, please. All yours.
Thank you
Go
much.
ahead.
Thank you very much. So let me just try out. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. And what about this? This comes out clearly as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. So good. So let me begin. So I must thank ACM India for hosting me, and this is indeed an honor for me. So I'm going to talk about, I'm Milin Sohni, as Hemant introduced me. I'm from IIT Bombay, and my last, before the lockdown, I was at IIT Goa, a new IIT. And I'm going to talk about interdisciplinarity in engineering and engineering. So it's really about engineering systems and how they work in society. So before I go on, I dedicate this talk to Professor Dhamdere, who was my first teacher of computer science and who deeply influenced my understanding and also his hard work and his dedication. So this talk is dedicated to him. So, so let's go back to the main topic. So interdisciplinary engineering. So I'm really going to talk about where are the new jobs going to come from. I think most of our graduates are really worried about that. And the second thing is that that is, of course, related to how society actually works. So I'm going to talk about public engineering systems, and I will and I'll hopefully illustrate how interesting they can be and how many the sort of opportunities that they offer for all of us. So I'm going to use public transport as an example. I could have used drinking water, but public transport is, I think, closer to computer science. So it's obviously work with my students, Sudhanshu, Anshu, and many others. So what I'm going to cover is, what we will cover is, of course, what is engineering? How do we measure it? What are its impacts on society? And we will basically understand how engineering systems are embedded in society and their importance. And in the public transport case study, I'm going to look at the importance of public transport, how to measure public transport. Then I'm going to look at an enterprise which actually delivers public transport, which is Taluka Bus Depot. Taluka is a tehsil in north of India, and it's probably Mandal in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. It's Taluka in Karnataka and in Maharashtra. And then we are going to look at some of the data sets, Form 4 and ETIM ticketing, And then we will look at some computer science mapping of it, which is GIS and optimization, which it's closest to, and then we will conclude. So let me begin with the first question: is that how does what is engineering? So how do we measure it? And the answer is, in newspapers, we will see that it's measured by production. So industrial production, manufacturing, how much food products we make, including Ganpati idols, mosquito swatters, and in recent times, of course, masks, ventilators, PPs, and so on. But it is also the capacity to manufacture, fighter planes. So we heard recently that, we are going to manufacture, I think, 50 fighter plane Tejas every year, or maybe Ludhiana manufactures about 100 to 500 machines, CNC machines. Our capacity to refine petroleum, and so on. So there are many industrial measures of engineering. But if you look at the social side, well, that's everything that is produced must be consumed. So it may be, for example, the number of microscopes per million. Do all our schools have microscopes? Or number of buses per 1 million, right? So what is the vehicle of convenience? What is the vehicle of vehicle of choice? And so these are product-based consumption. But there's also engineering services. For example, percentage of farmers with access to electricity, or homes with access to electricity. Of course, for farmers, irrigation pumps run on electricity, and they are one of the big consumers of electricity. And then maybe a number of homes with tap water. So if you look at electricity and water, these are really engineering systems. So they are basically, there's a transmission, there's a generation, then there's a consumption side. So one may think that, well, that is pretty much how you describe a society. That's not true, because there are other very important social and cultural metrics. So for example, number of books published per 1 million, or number of birds seen in a district. For example, do we see paradise flycatcher in your district, or do you see the titwi or the red munia, and many more environmental concerns? For example, is there free flow in our monsoon, in our rivers after monsoon? And even even deeper social is, say, number of intercaste marriages in our society. So there are all these metrics, but we are going to focus on the social metrics of engineering services. So let's look at a simple engineering service, that of drinking water. So if you look at drinking water, this is data. This is Maharashtra. Every polygon over here is a tehsil or a taluka. And what we have is percentage, this from census 2001, percentage of rural households with primary source more than 500 meters away. So, and the red spot is more than 30% of the households. So what it means is more than 30% of the households fetch water from more than half a kilometer. So, so that's how an engineering service is being provided. And if you go from 2001 to 2011, we see that the red spots have actually increased. So what do we understand? That drinking water is actually getting farther and farther away. And moreover, we know that it's last 2 years has been a good monsoon, but we know that drinking water is not available year round. So by the way, the same is with cooking energy. I think firewood is the cooking fuel for most of us, for about 50% of us. So these are, energy, transport, drinking water, these are basically engineering services. So let's go, let's understand what its consequences are. So on the right side, on the left side is our familiar drinking water map. And on the right side is the map of GER, that is gross enrollment ratio. That is how many students of the 12th standard actually go on to college. So you will see that the red spots here and the red spots there actually match. So, and should that surprise us? Well, no. I mean, fetching water and firewood, easily takes about 2-3 hours. So if our young girls or young boys are going to fetch firewood and water, they are not going to go to school or college. And so, it takes time. And if they're not going to go to school and college, they are basically trapped in a low income life. So, so this is one obvious connection. But the second connection is also quite important. If you look at number of jobs, right? So what I've done here is I've plotted on the x-axis the available. So by the way, every spot here is a district. So for example, this is district Aurangabad, this is Thane, this is Ratnagiri, and so on. So on the x-axis, I have plotted the water availability, in the cities of that district. And on the y-axis, I have plotted the number of jobs per thousand, formal jobs with salary. So what do we see? We see that the districts have to move to the right, that is, improve their water availability before jobs start rising. So there's a transition which all of them have to make from to the right and then up. So which is, by the way, this Aurangabad is an exception because it had a very good, it's an old industrial district and which had very, very good water supply about 30, 40 years ago. So, I mean, this is kind of obvious that unless the district has good water supply, industries are not going to come there. So really what we understand is that we really need an industrial revolution of 2.0, which was more about engineering services. So one question, I mean, after you look at all of this, one question would be, why are we doing so badly? What is the reason? So here is my understanding of it. So let us look at per capita steel consumption. So this is so we consume about 57 kilos per person per year. Now that's about, I think, about 10 square meters of concrete. So if you build a house, then if you build a house this year, then you have exhausted your quota for about 5 years. So that tells us, but if you compare other countries, so for example, UK is 145, China, of course, is 477. This is 2012 data. So, after all, steel is the raw material for engineering. That's how you make, chips, or you make cabinets for your computers, you make bridges, buses, aeroplanes, chemical plants, and so on. So really, I mean, and it's very important for engineering infrastructure. So we see that really, I mean, even very mature societies like UK, which have a lot of infrastructure, need 145, but we are, making do with 57. So the real answer why we are not able to, the real answer is not, you see, steel is very easy to produce. It's not high tech. So the real answer is that there is no demand. So there is no profitable way of using steel and producing value. So our drinking water supply systems are failing. Our railways, they are not profitable while transporting commuters, passengers, and our public transport is also at a loss, is making loss, and so on. So really, what we need are nice engineering business models, or social and financial models to, actually deliver engineering. So what is happening is that engineering in India is not very profitable. So that's the whole conclusion. So we really need to do better. So how do we do it? So we need better analysis. Why are things going wrong? That needs research, and that should translate into better training for our engineers. And the second point is that we need better formal entry points. We need, I mean, even if you have a great solution for the railways should be able to absorb it, or you should be able to approach the railways and say that, well, here's my plan, and then why don't you evaluate it and then give me a job, or give my company a job, right? So this is how, these are the two things which we need to do. So what I'm going to do is, let us take a sector, engineering sector, and just understand, how we deliver value, right? So my claim is that, as we know, that the fruits at the lower end are really easily accessible, and let's try to understand. So let's open the carton of public transport and see what's inside. So let me warn you that it's a real zoo out there, and there are many animals, and so we have to model how they work, right? Different systems which are overlapping. So I'm going to just go over. So I'm going to talk about the bus depot, its importance of the sector, bus depot, and then the timetable, which is really the service that public transport provides, and then various other technical analysis. So I would have said stop me and ask questions, but I think that I will take up questions at the very end. Okay, so let's look at the importance of public transport. So the first thing is that if you see how do rural people go to work. So well, 30% of 40% here don't walk at all or don't go anywhere. They're working from home. About 22% actually walk. So about that covers about 60% of us who either walk to work or don't walk at all. So then some of them use cycles. Well, and the bus actually is, 12% of the people actually use a bus. So we know that, for those people who are walking or staying at home, their employment opportunities are quite limited. And the more public transport that is available, cheap public transport, the better it's going to be. Otherwise, if you see that they're going to buy private, motorcycles, which was 8%, this is 2011, and it is increasing, and we know that that's causing a lot of pollution. So we really, the bus system is poised to really either lose or win in this race for public transport. And the other point, if you look at the gender issue, we see that, you know, uh, the ratio of men to women is best in the buses. They are very poor. They don't ride two wheelers, they don't ride cycles, they walk a lot more, but they ride buses as well. So even for that, bus transport is quite important. So I hope that I've given you sufficient understanding of how important public transport is. It's also important for kids going to school. Colleges, your school may be near you, but your college is typically 10 kilometers away, and travel to college is again by bus. So let's look at, MSRTC, Maharashtra State Road Transport Corporation. So that's so that's about that's the state, the state agency. So it has 1.05 lakh people, 15,000 buses. The number of people per bus is about 5.7. The number of kilometers a bus travels at 310. Now here is where the performance starts showing. So if you have a bus, it should be on the road for 12 hours. So if I divide by 12, we see that it's probably going at 24 kilometers per hour. So either the roads are bad or the buses are not being utilized well enough. Then kilometers per staff, 54. So is that good? And fuel efficiency is 4.76. So hidden in these numbers is really how MSRTC is doing. So then we see, if you look at the newspaper cuttings, well, they're not doing well. They have been raising fares and so on. But what they claim is that about 75% of the villages in Maharashtra they cover, and which covers about 91% of the population. So it's clearly a very important connectivity for rural people, and especially the bottom 80%. They rely on public transport and public buses. So let's now look at an enterprise, look at a particular, we want to solve a concrete problem, right? So let's understand what a concrete system looks like, and let's dig deeper into it and understand what's going on. So let's look at, this is Thane district in Maharashtra. Within that is a tehsil, this is Shahpur Taluka. So that's about 3.6 lakh people and partly urban and 1600 square kilometer area. So let's go there. So this is how the bus depot looks like. There is a waiting room, there are corridors, and there is a bus platform. So it has about 65 buses, about 220 staff, 270 routes, 80 villages it covers, and a load factor of 63%. Now that's not good. And indeed, about the losses of Shahpur about 25 to 30%. So really this load factor needs to increase. So the way they measure, so here's the first metric, the way they measure is that the earnings per kilometer. So category A is that the earnings per, so how do they measure that? So if you take a route, say it is 20 kilometers long, in a month it travels 30 times, so 30 into 20 is 600 kilometers, and then compute the tickets sold, divide, and you get a number. So this earnings per kilometer greater than 43, obviously it's very good. 22 to 43, okay. Less than 22, bad. And if you see how Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot is doing, about 40 to 45% are either moderate or bad. Only 15% are good. So here is a question which we should answer: how to make Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot profitable, financially or socially. So by the way, I don't measure everything by money, right? Nor do you. And even if I know that, well, it's taking 50% of the students to school, we don't care whether it's making a profit or loss, correct? Because typically girl students travel free, and boys get a 50% rebate. So we really don't. We want to deliver. We want the engineering system to deliver value. So this is where we are, and I think that computer scientists can do a lot. Essentially, we have the systems approach. So now that we have introduced the enterprise, let's look a bit deeper. So this is how the Taluka depot looks like. So by the way, if you remember your Intel chip architecture and so on, so this is really the ALU. This is the ALU, and this is the instruction pipeline. Then there's some data pipeline, and by the way, there is a material pipeline as well. So essentially, there are three systems. There's a traffic system. There's a workshop which maintains the buses, and there's accounting which does the ticketing and so on. And it is controlled by a depot manager. And there are various data sets, ETIM and ABC, which are to do with traffic, and Form 4 and roster, which are to do with scheduling. So this is how the Taluka Bus Depot chip looks like. So again, this is my description, or my student's description. So there are many units. What are the inputs and outputs? One can easily describe. Okay, so let's look at the first data set, which is the timetable. So if you go to the Taluka Bus Depot, you'll see that on the wall is a big timetable. So it will say, for example, Dolkham, at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12:20, at 13:20, and so on. So this timetable is really how the service of the Taluka Bus Depot is delivered to the people. So let's try to code it, step back and see what how do they actually deliver. So there we will see that the Taluka Bus Depot organizes the timetable in terms of Form 4, or there's something called, it's a standard India standard Form 4, where all the trips. So let me look at so there's a Shahpur Murbad trip at 5:45, and it reaches at 7:15, and then from Murbad it comes back to Shahpur at 7:45 and reaches at 9:15, and so on. So these 4 services are done by the same bus, or rather these 8 services. So from here, from Murbad Shahpur, Shahpur Murbad, Murbad Shahpur, and so on, these 8 services are done by a single bus. So that is really what a schedule is. So the schedule is a sequence of trips. And what is a trip? Trip is a source, destination, distance, which is 42.7 kilometers, start time, which is 5:45, and end time, which is 7:45. So I hope it's clear what my trip is. Shahpur to Murbad is one trip, Murbad to Shahpur is the next trip, and so on. So by the way, this schedule, this C1 is from 5:45 in the AM to 13:15 in the afternoon. So this is about 8 hours, and one crew of driver and conductor do this. Then in C2, we have these 4 trips, and another set of driver and conductor do these 4 trips, right? So what is the schedule? Schedule is a sequence of trips where T2 follows T1, T3 follows T2, and so on. And same crew, same vehicle, 8 hours, right? So Shahpur Taluka, so this is the first thing which takes us from the delivery of the service to how it's actually implemented in the Taluka Bus Depot. So really, given a timetable, if you look at a timetable, one question is how many buses are needed to serve a timetable. So for example, if people ask that, no, we want more buses for the schools, so then the Taluka Bus Depot will say, well, I have only 60 buses. And then we have to look at the schedule and say that, is there a better way of, including those trips into the schedule? So we see that, the schedule is a mathematical construction which affects both quality of service as well as efficiency, right? So, what people get and the ability of the bus depot to, of profit and loss. So, I mean, there are many other things. For example, we saw that between T1 and T2, there was a gap of 30 minutes. So one would say that, well, why, if a bus reaches some Murbad, why does it have to wait for 30 minutes? Why not, turn it back in 20 minutes? Well, the reason may be that frequently there's a delay, right? Because the roads are bad, or maybe there's a traffic jam, and maybe and maybe actually it should not be 30, but 40, right? So again, for example, can the trip links be done dynamically? So these are all scheduling questions which are quite important. And mathematically too, I think they can mathematically too. They are very interesting, because essentially given the timetable, I can construct a partial order out of it, right? So basically, one trip, how given a trip, what are the possible trips which can follow it, and then if I draw, for example, if you see MPC to PJM is one trip which ends at 11:25, the same bus can do a PJM to Harmal because it starts at 12, so I can put an arrow here, then I can put an arrow there, and so on, and I construct this partial order. It's a master TT POSET. And then the buses is just basically a path covering of these of this partial order. So I mean, this is a polynomial time algorithm. It's called the min cost flow problem. It's related to something in data structures which you must have read, Dilworth's theorem, partial orders. All this is really all this modeling is really pretty much what you can do in a computer science class. And you can actually optimize the number of buses. So for example, our basic analysis reduced the number from 55 to about 53, so reduction of 2 buses. But again, it depends very much on how we don't know how delayed the trips were and so on. So we need to solve the bus number problem, we need to really engage better. But this representation, which is this particular representation, this form 4 representation, it doesn't tell us that what are the villages and on a particular trip. So for example, Kinavli, how many buses pass through Kinavli? So that's there in the ticketing data, we will come to that. Or how many villages in Shahpur are covered? Is my village covered? How many schools are covered, right? And so on. So these questions the form 4 data set does not answer. So we need to expand the data set. So simple thing is to look at the form 4, it has a source and destination, put it into some map search engine, put all the locations and from to, and whatever you get, you plot it. So this is what I've done here. So I've plotted all the sources and destinations, and here is the map I get, right? Then what I do is I add to it the village map, which I obtained from the government, and I put it here, and I just color the villages differently. So I know that, so these are the places where the road network goes, and these are some of the villages that are missed, right? So we already know, we already have much better information about what is this service delivering. And then about schools, well, again, I can go to the Tahsildar office and get all the locations of the schools, and then I see that, well, that's good that there are a few schools here which are not close to the bus network, but otherwise the ST bus network is pretty much close to most of the schools. Right? So but then if you look at a deeper question, how many trips pass through a given location, right? Or how do dense areas have more trips, right? So what was the difference here? We are talking about reachability, right? And now we really want the schedule, frequency. So that needs much more analysis. So what I've done is constructed a graph structure, a digital geography. So in which all these important locations are points, right? And there may be some intermediate points because, for example, important locations or bifurcations in the road network, and I connect this by edges if there's a direct road. So this is what I call a digital geography. Basically it's a graph representation of the geometry, and then a route just becomes, a path in this graph. So for example, Sabgaon, one route is Sabgaon, Fata 2, Fata 1, Dolkham. Other is Sabgaon, Fata 1, Dolkham. So now at Fata 1, there are two services or two trips which are coming to Fata 1, two routes and two trips. So this digital geography actually is a very, very important substratum. And that is how most of these Google Maps and so on work. They have constructed digital geography underneath what you see. But sadly, none of our taluka bus depots really have their own digital geography. They don't know really, they can't answer most of these questions. So we constructed the digital geography for Shahpur, and here are all the vertices and the edges. So here was the road network. It had about 1.5 lakh nodes, and this was about 500 or 600 nodes. So there was a substantial reduction in the data as well. Okay, so I hope that so this was one thing. So basically, once you have the representation of the digital geography, then it's a database question. How many trips? For example, here you have a vertex is either a terminal or a FATA, then a route segment. So for example, so what is an edge? It's a route segment. Routes are trips are, and so on. So essentially, what we see is that once we standardize this representation, much of the queries, much of the questions that we had are really, queries to a database system. And the digital geography is a nice way of coding what really is happening in the taluka bus depot. So once we have this, once we have the digital geography, the coloring of the map is by density, is by population density in the villages, right? So this is again obtained from government data. And now we see that, well, the road network, the taluka, the ST network actually goes through a lot of places with high density. And then we can actually plot the schools and how much does this person have to walk to fetch the road to come to the ST network. So all of this now, once we have the digital geography, we have a lot of entry points into understanding what is going on. Just hold on. Yeah, I'm sorry, there was a disturbance. So we have, yeah. So I'm doing fine with time, I think. Yes. So we have essentially we have looked at only one data set, namely the timetables, or rather the form 4, which is the end-to-end timetable. And we have understood that there are many points about efficiency, about access, which can be answered. Only if we support the form 4 data set with much more geographical data, administrative data. So now right now the problem is that most of the standard national form 4 structure does not have intermediate times or intermediate timetables for intermediate stops. So if you are at Kinavli in the middle, there is no way that there is a timetable for you for what are the buses which come to Kinavli. That's the fact. So now that gives us an interesting data fitting problem. I think, basically given the end-to-end timings and the distances between, how do I attribute timings in the middle? So that's an interesting data fitting problem. I think Abhiram Ranade, our colleague, has worked on it for the Mumbai Navigator. And in IIT Dharwad, students actually rode the bus and got the stop names and times, ideal times. So once this data is aggregated, we can actually publish timetables, right? So the other source for timetabling data are tickets. So by the way, in Maharashtra, I think in many states we have gone to automatic ticketing machines. So they're called ETIM, electronic ticket sum machine, ETIM, right? So these ETIM data is very rich, okay, and if we can gather something out of it, that would be really great. So what does the ticketing data look like? So let me go through. So this is a snapshot of a ticketing data. So for example, Kasara to Nasik CBS, 1 full ticket, 0 half ticket, 89 rupees was the fare, and the ticket was issued at 7:08 8 minutes past 7. Or if you look at, Kasara to Malegaon, one again, ticket was 224 rupees and so on. So because of this ticketing machines, now actually the ticketing data is available completely. So what does it look like? Trip ID, so that's, the date, start destination, and time of issue and fare. So, but sadly, there are still many issues here. So, for example, when did the trip start? Say, for example, if you have a ticket, Shahpur to Swargate, a trip, or our old friend Murbad, Shahpur to Murbad. At what time did the trip start? So the conductor has not. There is no way unless the conductor notes down the time. And this is the time that I started. There is no digital representation of that. So, and other questions are there, that are the destination ID standard, are the trip ID standard, and so on. So there were many issues which we had to manage, and we recommended to them that they should have a dummy ticket when the bus starts. When the driver turns on the ignition, there should be a dummy ticket which is issued so that we know when the trip has started, right? So how do we? So let's look at punctuality. So the first thing we did was, for a given trip, find out when was the first ticket issued. That's a good indicator of when the bus started. So based on that, we see that, I scheduled about 20%. Within 10 minutes of, within 10 minutes was 44%, 20 minutes or so, but there were about 20 to 25% buses which were actually late by more than 20 minutes, right? So this is, this actually tells us, if a bus is not punctual, then will it be profitable? Unlikely, unless there are only one or two buses and they are in the whole, and there are no other providers. So in a normal system, there will be many other, there will be auto, rickshaw, there will be a Vikram, 6-seater, and so on, which may charge more, but which may just take away the passengers meant for the bus. So I think that this tells you that GPS-based time stamping, and more guidance to passengers, which will enable us to guide the passenger, where is your bus? So those are needed. So essentially what we see then is that, if you come to profitability, there is no, I've already explained how they do the profitability, there's earnings per kilometer, but there's no social accounting here. How many students traveled or how many workers traveled. So we don't really know about, whether the bus system is really, whether the bus is doing its social delivery, whether it's doing or not. So that's, and the computation of the profit, the profitability also is error prone. So we went through the logs, and tried to automate from the ETIM data. How do I compute the profitability? That was not really in place. So we tried to put it in place, and there were a few discrepancies we found, so that we corrected that. So this is really the ABC, the computation of the ticketing, from the ticketing data, the profitability was also needed some interpretation. So which we understood. So once now you have the profitability, you can map it on the map and show, well, so these are your these are your A routes, these are your C routes. Of course, the time, so the region is also, what regions are the A routes going, what are the times of operation, all of those are important. But the GIS allows you a good viewing of what exactly, where are your problem area. So let me now look at the last technical topic. So that was the ridership analysis. So given a path, so given a trip, so it's say from Shahpur to Mahuli, right? And the tickets sold from Shahpur to Manas Mandir, so many tickets from Shahpur to Mahuli, and so on. So if I know the tickets sold, then I can compute the ridership at any point. So for example, at this point, there were 7 riders or 6 riders. At this point, again, 6, and at this point, 4 riders, and so on, right? So given any trip, I can do the ridership analysis for that trip to understand, what parts of the trip are profitable, what parts of the trip there is a lot of ridership, and so on. So now we did a rider analysis for, say, here is a trip from Shahpur to Pune, Swargate, Pune. So what do we see? When we see that at Thane railway station, it empties. So there are only 5 people. So really, the bus from Shahpur to Pune empties at Thane, and then some new people in Thane come up and go to Pune, right? So is it serving the people of Shahpur? No. So probably this service is serving more the people of Thane who want to go to Pune, right? So this analysis actually tells us, where is, what is being served, how many people are being served, and so on. So by the way, also notice that the average ridership is 22. So, and I think that the initial part is about 30, 25 to 30, but later on the ridership, in intermediate improves, but the average rider is only 22, right? So this is also an important indicator. So basically for any trip, we can do this analysis. So by the way, let's just come here quickly. So if I do the trip occupancy, so we see, we see the ridership is, say, ridership 27, 13, 22, 25, 15, 31, right? So 31 is good. So that tells us that, for example, now there is a ridership of 13, which is constant, which is not good. But maybe we should have a mini bus which will serve that route. So I think, looking at the ridership, of the trip, and looking at what are the buses that you have, maybe we have 44-seater, 20-seater, 30-seater, we can have, we can try and match the ridership with the bus. And there are many other interesting things also to note. So if I compute the, apply the Kirchhoff current law, how many people have left Shahpur and how many people have come into Shahpur? So you will see that more people have left Shahpur, more tickets are sold from Shahpur to outside than from outside to Shahpur. Now, why is that? So, you'll see that more buses are punctual leaving Shahpur than coming into Shahpur. So if the bus is not punctual, then there will be ridership will actually suffer. So this sort of tells you, what is the connection between ridership and punctuality, right? So, so how do I just schedule the services so that ridership improves? These are also nice problems of optimization. So I've already discussed the ridership and the ridership, bus size, and capacity utilization. How we can improve. So I'll come to the last point, a small point. So we also looked at schools. How is the bus system serving schools? So we picked a school. The school was at Dolkham. This is the school, and then we looked at the villages. These are the villages for which this is the closest school, right? So we expected that students from these villages will come to Dolkham, but when we actually went there, we saw that these villages, students from these will also come here. And the reason was that this is an English medium school and it was supposed to be a good school, right? So this is its catchment. So now we would like to ask, so are there buses to suit the schedule? So we see that, well, there was just, the school timing was at 10 to 5, and there were only 4 services, and out of which 2 may be called as, reasonably close to the bus school timing. So, and then if you ask the students, it's a pretty sad story. Most, if you look at who rides the bus, so, Jeep and bus. So those students who typically walk, the distance to the school is 10 kilometers, they are riding the bus or the Jeep. And most of the people, for example, if you look at 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers walking, walk, 7-kilometer walk, 6-kilometer walk. So all of these students are actually walking to school. So we understand that, or they take the, so the bus, Jeep, so there are those Jeeps which are crammed with people. So you see how it all pans out. So I think what I've done is, what I've really done is, so what is the point? We have seen all of, what we have done is unpacked, we have unpacked this, unpacked the Taluka bus depot. We have seen what are the various data sets, why are they unprofitable, what are the reasons for their, and what are the different types of ways of measuring what is profitability, what is social value. And we have found that all of these things are fairly simple and fairly easy to model. So they are min cost flow, ridership, KVL, KCL, systems, data structures, databases, ETIM, graphs, and so on. So what we see is underneath these bad numbers that so many of our students are walking 6 kilometers to go to school. So if you have a cold, are you going to go to school? No. So if there was a bus, you may. So I think that what I have tried to point out is that there are many problems within this engineering system which are really accessible to a system type analysis, right? So if we did analyze these, we would understand it better. So really now we understand why is Shahpur Taluka, which needs maybe 60 buses, but it is it just not able to provide a service, transportation service profitability or with delivering social value. So that really explains why our number 57 is so bad, because we've just not analyzed our systems well. So as I said, it needs better analysis and better research and better training. We need to train our engineers better to be able to ask such questions. So unless we ask such questions, solutions will not come up. And once solutions come up, we need to provide our students and our institutions formal entry points. So will Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot allow us to intervene? Maybe can we be a consultant to the Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot? I think that is what we need to really start looking. I think the problems are there, and they're not very difficult. The bottom, I think bottom of the fruit, I forget the term, phrase. So that's there for us to, the low hanging fruit, right? The low hanging fruit is there for us to get, and we really need to do that. So what has been shown is that bringing better analysis and research and better training, can easily bring 5 to 10% efficiency through operations. We need better social accounting, we need wider access, and many high-tech fashionable areas like GPS, GIS, are there for us to use. But we need a system thinking approach, not merely tinkering labs are not going to work. We need to go out there, and we need interdisciplinary training. We need to tell students that it's okay to spend a day at the bus station and just observing people. What do they do? Observing students. So it's okay to, and we should be free to give credits. So if a student from computer science observes and sits and rides the bus just to understand how people, what choices people make, that's fine. And secondly, it needs formal entry points, as I said. So for elite institutions like ISCs and the IITs and ICERs, they have to illustrate that these engagements will actually deliver better systems. So we really have to engage with the bus depots, the drinking water supply department, the ration office. If you look at the PDS, it has a great logistics problem. It has to deliver millions of bags of rice and wheat and so on. So our institution need to seed startups and help our students or graduates procure the first work order. I would like a work order from Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot worth 20 lakhs, and I know I can deliver. So we need to get them. We need faculty members to really think differently, and institutions to have that vision. So let me tell you that some of the most intellectually challenging work was this. Drinking water or public transport has been really extremely challenging mathematically and intellectually. I've understood society much better. So for ACM, I would suggest that curricula which is more immersive and which takes students out of the class, focus on society and design. So there's a lot of design which hopefully I've indicated. And collection of standard case studies. The Shahpur Taluka Bus Depot would be a good case study for students to follow, and of course faculty training. So we need to separate the hype and where the real jobs are. You see, there are hundreds and I think about 10 lakh engineering students who graduate every year. And we need to find ways that they can contribute to society. So we need to really put students in the driver's seat. So let me stop here. Let me thank you. So this is a photo from our trip to some other Sinnar bus depot, which I took my students to. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Milin, for a Very insightful and very practical talk. And I think you are known for applying theory to practice and for especially for solving societal problems. So thank you very much. We have some time for taking a few questions. So first, let me take up a question from, there is a question from Joel. Is it recommended to be a type of person who specializes in one subject than generalized in a variety of subjects, or being a polymath possible in the current world?
Can I see that question? Is it there on the?
Yeah, go to Q&A window.
Okay. Yeah.
And you will be able to see it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that you see the engineering curricula, which my dad studied, and the engineering curricula which we are doing are very different. So I think as the companies have become specialized, you see, so have the curricula. But Indian engineering, or for that matter, even in the US, it still needs a lot of generalists. So I think that a more generalist training is really needed. So that's the whole point. I think that the specialization is, a few very high-tech companies need, for example, Intel wants an electrical engineering. They will want you to do 2 courses in IC chip design and so on. But for a general engineer, I think the training itself needs to be a bit different.
Thank you.
So I think that it's the training and our perspective that, just as we say that liberal education is a holistic education, I think engineering is also a holistic social change agent training. So it's more like that. I think we should view it more like that.
There is a question from, you can also see it, Milin.
Yeah.
Subramaniam. How do you begin including, I think let's repeat it for the sake of others. So how do you begin inculcating the practice of how to collect data and what data to collect in students? So how do you inculcate that practice in students? Engineering or otherwise? Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that importance of data, is is understated. So even now, if you look at machine intelligence, if you ask our researchers, what are the data sets? What are you working on? So then that raises a question, really, where is the data? But that's not, I have used census data, and, if you go to any government office, they will be happy to give you the data to work on. But I think using data, even collecting small data, for example, IIT students, Dharwad students collected the Dharwad city bus data for themselves. And once then they piece it all together, then they see the reality emerge before their very eyes. So I think that, how that also includes teamwork, data collection schedules, how to make the schedules, then who is a good data collector, who's a bad data collector. Some of the lower CPI students actually are very diligent data collectors and understand these things better. So I think it just, the respect for data collection, it should be there. So I think that the excitement of it, it's like the jigsaw pieces coming together. So I think that's very important.
Thanks. In the chat box, there is a question from Professor Venkatesh Raman. What was your experience with the talukas and other government officials in their willingness to share the data and to adapt your suggestions? In particular, did you see a willingness at higher level in these organizations to scale up these solutions and analyses?
So let me tell you that I have had the best experience with government of Maharashtra agencies. Okay, so, and one very important thing is that I am from IIT. So being from an elite institution does actually open up, they are very pleased. The Taluka Bus Depot, she was a lady, she had never seen an IIT professor. So she was, oh, you have come here, and then, why don't you wave your magic wand and things like that. So I think that provided you show some humility, and that you have come to analyze and help, and some patience about what their troubles are. For example, go to the ETIM, where the ticket machines are there. Then you see how those ticket machines are being charged. there's so many chargers. Then they ask you, can you do something about the charging? So I think it's a lot more of empathy is needed. And then looked at all this and presented it to the IS officer who's in charge. He was very happy. So, I mean, small things like introducing a zero ticket, to at the start of the trip. That's a very small change which he needed to make. So he says, yeah, I don't know how to, I have not analyzed punctuality at all. And this is really important. So, I mean, so for example, the ABC, the profitability accounting, we automated it, that you have everything in the Excel sheets. Why don't you put it in the database and just fire a query? So then now everybody is doing it. Now all over Maharashtra, the same procedure is being followed. So I think they don't want to change the schedule that quickly. So because that involves a lot more faith. So I think the small things they will do right away. So, and engagement, you see in the water sector, my engagement with the government is for some maybe 8-10 years. Now, I mean, now they trust us, IIT and our team, with a lot of changes. So we are actually building automatic, designing tools. So I think engagement is very important, and elite institutions have to open up. So once I have started talking to Shahpur, now the local college can do the grunt work, and they are happy doing it because they also understand better. So I think we have to clear the undergrowth and open the path for others to follow.
So as you mentioned, elite institutions also have to do this, and we also hope that the governments and the talukas and those, they respond to non-elite institutions who are trying to do good work. So on either sides, I think good work is happening, and hopefully we will see good response. We're seeing better response. There is another question from an attendee. How will bachelors in programming and data science help us in coming future? And since you also mentioned that ACM could also take up certain things, so your answer might provide some direction also in the sense that so what could change in curriculum? Yeah.
I think that, machine intelligence, data, I mean, these are all important areas. So but I think that what can a normal programming person do, right? And what places can it deliver value? I think those avenues need to be opened up by ACM, and who can advise AICT. I think Taluka Bus Depot is another, just one example. But I have worked with district collectors. They have now faced with contracts for PDS, trucks. How many trucks do I need for my PDS? So and right now, they make an order of scale, a contract which should be, at 10 paisa per bag per kilometer is at 1 rupee. So they are making a mistake of an order of magnitude. And basic programming, entry point programming for students, I mean, if we do it, will help. But this hackathon business is not going to help. I think it has to be institution led. The institution provides the continuity. So student on their own do some hackathon and get on with it. That's not going to work. I think the institution has an important role of guiding, ensuring the reports meet a certain quality, they are actionable, and they are they are defendable. So that it's a scientific output, and the institution should be able to stand behind it. This is what we have done, and I think that this can be. And the district collectors are up to here with work. If any systematic input they get, they will be very happy. The collector is, even higher than Vishnu in my ranking. I mean, they are really messed up.
Right. Another question. This one is from Jayant Haritsa. Do you see your students continuing this kind of work even after they leave IITB, or how can they continue after leaving IIT?
Well, I think those students in that photo are from my course Development Engineering, which was for undergrads. So about 25% of the students actually go on into careers which are either entrepreneurial careers, or they move into something which is more interfacial. So I think it does help them, and the world is going to be interfacial. I mean, even in computer science, we see that most of the contributions to computer science are now coming from outside computer science. So we need computer science needs the, and we are better placed for such, because we are system thinkers.
Mhm. Thanks. Another question we'll take from Abhijat Vichare. How does such excellent work help a teacher in the day-to-day teaching? Any personal examples or anecdotes that
Oh,
you can share?
I think it's very inspiring, because what you teach normally is available on YouTube or in Coursera. But how you behave in front of the taluka bus depot or the IS officer or with normal students, that is where the learning actually happens. And that is where you will find it very fulfilling, that as a teacher, you have actually taught how society runs, and what is the role of a teacher as a mediator between students who are young people and society at large, and how is value really delivered. So it is extremely inspiring. It's very, because you are seeing the problem for the first time, and you are opening up the box of worms, and then you are with the gentleness that you open the box and pull out one worm at a time, respect it, and open up the whole thing. That makes such a big impact on students.
Uh, Milin, uh, you said it was very inspiring, your experiences and things like that. I must say it on behalf of everyone. So what you shared with us has been very inspiring as well for all of us. So thank you very much
Thank you.
for spending time with us and sharing your thoughts, sharing your work. And well, continue the good work. And
Okay, thanks a lot.
as per your suggestion, we at ACM, as well as other institutions and so on, we will take up your suggestions and
Thank you very much.
pitch
Thank you
in
very
as
much.
well. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
The whole DBP, Professor Phatak, has a comment saying that great session, Milin.
Yeah,
Of
thanks.
course, he's been aware of your work.
I mean, Phatak, Dhamdere, all of these are really like
Absolutely.
I'm very affected by what all they have done for me.
Yeah.
Sprout, Deepak, Phatak, Dhamdere were the stalwarts, and I mean, they have been the role models, and their work in society of high quality has been very inspiring. So there's no question.
So instead of my words, my wrap-up comments about you to thank you, I'm going to just repeat what DBP said, because I couldn't have said it better. Okay. He says, I've been aware of your passion, glad to see it percolating to many more. Involvement, empathy, humility, small changes, and the role of an engineer in all this. Most of all, your real joy of making an impact in teaching using all the personal experiences. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah,
so all of us
good
echo
words
this.
from my teacher. That's really nice. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Milin. And with this, we conclude the morning session. Just a reminder to everybody that we are going to be back at 4 o'clock. Again, we have some wonderful keynote talks. And then, of course, the evening session, which is the award ceremony, as well as reports from Jayant, who's ACM president, the annual report, as well as we have guests joining from ACM Global, ACM HQ. So see you then. Unless there is any other announcement from the organizers, from the host, is there anything that I should announce? Otherwise, we can close the session. Thank you.
Yes, Hemant. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, Suresh.
So for no issues, I think we can continue from the 4 o'clock session.
Correct. So see you all at 4 o'clock again for the afternoon and evening session. So with that, signing off. Thank you to everybody who participated enthusiastically. Bye now. Suresh, you may want to bring up that the slide until you sign off.
Yes, yeah.